So I thought I would, make sure my sound's up. Um, I thought I would just say some things about your first sermon, this character sermon. We're making a transition from 3 weeks studying the Enneagram, understanding ourselves, uh, recognizing qualities in other types. And we're now making the shift into preaching. And then you will be, of course, preaching your sermon at Gathering Days next week. This transition is, and this particular assignment is a way for you to get a deeper sense of your own type, but also to translate what you've learned, whatever you've learned, into a practice, which will be preaching. So you're integrating two different kinds of skills. So the assignment for this week is to defend your character. What I'm looking for in that assignment is, what are the qualities, based on the readings, based on the videos, based on other comments from me or other members of the class, what qualities match that biblical character? And remember that this is an art. It's not a science. What you're doing is doing your own interpreting of that character. There's a lot of different opinions, actually, certainly about biblical characters. Moses, for example, is typically seen as a 6, but in the moment when he kills the Egyptian, or there may be other moments, you see a little 8, or you see some, you see maybe a 9, pulling back, not answering God's call. Some of you all were even talking together, and I loved this, talking together about Ruth. I said, I think, that she was a 2. I can't remember who it was, but one of you all said, no, I see her as a loyalist. I see her as a 6. That's the kind of work that is really important to do right now. Lots of different Enneagram scholars see people very differently. For example, I use and believe Mr. Rogers was a 9, but a lot of people see him as a 2. Some people see, kind of shockingly to me, but some people see Matt Damon, who I see as an 8, as a 9. Barack Obama. Been a lot of controversy. In fact, when you go online, you'll see all these different opinions about different teachers' assessment of Barack Obama. I kind of think he tends to a 9. Some people still believe that he's a 3. All I'm saying is, defend your position. Bring whatever you have in terms of your knowledge to bear on that character. I do not expect that you can fully understand every nuance of the Enneagram system. But what I want to say about it is, this is what we do in every act of, whether it's biblical interpretation or interpretation of a theme. Let's say you're looking at a biblical text. If you've ever done a history of interpretation, what you're doing is looking at how that text was viewed in, say, the 3rd century, how it was viewed in the 15th century, how it's viewed in the 20th century, the 21st century, and you're looking at all the varieties of ways that this text has been interpreted. And then interpreted by political conservatives or postmodern liberals or spiritual seekers or justice seekers. Our approach to the text, our experience in life, gives us a particular way of seeing. And so interpretation is always a part of preaching. So the point really that I'm getting to is when you defend your character choice, I just want you to feel like you're on solid ground. This is where I stand. This is what I believe about this character and their Enneagram type. I think that in all of our preaching, what feels the most important is to be clear about where you stand. This is what I believe, and this is why. Or, I don't know what I believe. I'm torn between two things. What do you think? Whatever it is, just to be clear about where you are. And then secondly is just to communicate that as clearly and simply as possible so that people understand what you're saying. And then having some awareness about your purpose. What do you want the congregation to experience once you've preached your sermon? So just a tiny bit more about character preaching. I've printed some materials, but here's a little bit of an additional, some ideas. Character preaching is not the most common, of course, but it's a very viable and creative way to preach. Whether you bring a biblical character into the sanctuary, or you are bringing a historical figure into the sanctuary, when we look at particular individuals and their response to the Spirit, we're bringing a unique treasure forward. So you might do it kind of memoir style. I hadn't thought about this until I was working on this particular video. It can be looking back on my life, looking at that event in my life. This is what I see about what was real, about what was true, and this is what I understand about what it meant then. Something like the memoir. Or it could be a more biographical narrative. By that I mean a third person saying, this person is a really important person in my life and in the life of this community or the world or whatever you believe about that. And I want to talk to you about why that person is so important. What their gifts have been, what difference they've made. If we do something like historical fiction, you can be a little bit more creative with the story. Maybe you've always heard the Mary and Martha story one particular way. And maybe you want to present an aspect of Mary or Martha that no one's ever thought about before. Or it could be the burning bush. And some way of seeing that character or that moment that no one's ever seen before. So it gives a little creative flair to it. You could also do just tell it straight, kind of a Mark Twain one-person stage act. Works beautifully, just to present the character kind of straight. So those are some more options about ways to preach. If you've never preached before, or only a few times, and I know there's several of you for whom that's the case, I wrote 7 steps to writing a sermon for you. This is going to give you a very specific format to work with, step by step by step by step, if you don't already have a process. A lot of us, when we're learning something new, like some steps to follow, best practices. Some other people want to learn for themselves. They want to build a chair, but they want to learn how to build a chair. Don't tell me how to do it yet. I want to experience how to make a chair. But also, if you preach regularly, and so several of you have been preaching pretty consistently for a few months, you are probably very well aware that you're getting into a particular kind of habit with sermon preparation. Maybe even getting into a bit of a rut already with that process. So it can be a wake up. Oh, maybe I'll try this method. My sense is, and I thought about this with my tennis swing. I started playing tennis before I really learned skills in tennis. And what happened was I had to unlearn a lot of what I had kind of self-taught. So in some ways, when we learn to preach and we don't have a structure, we're just kind of finding our own way, but it's possible to unlearn some bad habits in order to develop a good process that will serve you well. I also think this might be a great time, if you have time, to check out Birthing the Sermon. There are a lot of stories about how, and this is women, have created what their process is. That can be an interesting experience to hear other people's process. And remember, too, that you're going to learn from each other. Several of you are very are more experienced than others. Maybe you'll post your best practices, what you've learned about the process. What I want to say is, if you've ever preached a sermon anywhere, you will have something to say about that. Like, never do this. This is what really messed me up. Or, wow, that worked beautifully. So that might be about how to arrange your note cards, how to stand, how to prepare yourself before you preach. There's all kinds of things that we're going to be learning in the process, and we can't learn it all at once. So just step by step by step. I look so forward to meeting you next week, hearing you preach, exploring what you're learning about yourself and the Enneagram, and about being authentic. See you then.